Lebanese are hoping for a new start following the first election since the country's economic collapse and the Beirut port explosion of 2020. The polls saw Hezbollah and its allies lose their majority in parliament. The Saudi-aligned Lebanese Forces have gained ground, winning about a dozen seats.
The country has awoken to a new chapter in its dizzying political history. After Sunday's election result, shift in the balance of power in the country's 128-seat parliament and its fragile sectarian power-sharing system have occurred. The ballot saw Iran-backed Hezbollah and its allies lose their parliamentary majority and their opponents, including the Saudi-aligned Lebanese Forces, a Christian faction, gain ground. Reform-minded political newcomers won about a dozen out of 128 seats. In its first session, Lebanon's new parliament is due to elect a speaker. Later this year, it has to vote for a new president to replace Michel Aoun, whose Free Patriotic Movement is Hezbollah's main Christian ally and whose term ends on October 31st.
Let's talk about this now with Thembisa Fakude, Senior Research Fellow at the Africa-Asia Dialogue. A very good evening to you and thanks so much for joining us, Thembisa. So the most of the population recently pushed into a state of poverty, a collapse of the Lebanese pound's value and national debt, nearly 5 times the size of its GDP. These elections, were they indicative of a new start, a last-ditch effort at change?
Well, we all hope so, but Lebanon is with a very complicated political setup. There's a national pact, an unwritten pact between the religious groupings there, the Maronite Catholics, the Shia and the Sunni. Those will select, for example, the Maronite Anglican or the Maronite Catholics will always have a president and the commander of the national force of Lebanon. And then you have the Shia, who are always allocated the position of the Speaker of Parliament. And then the Sunni will always be the one occupying the position of Prime Minister. And this was agreed in order to maintain some semblance of peace in Lebanon since the establishment of the country. So notwithstanding the elections that we've seen, and we've seen that Hezbollah, for example, has not gained majority as it's been in the past, but those 3 positions that are key in government are always determined by religious affiliation. So you're not going to have, it's going to be unlikely that you're going to have, for example, a speaker who's not a Shia, or you have a prime minister who's not a Sunni. No, we're going to have a president who doesn't come from the Maronite Catholics. So the elections, although they mean much and bring hope to many people, but the status quo in terms of those 3 very important positions within the Parliament of Lebanon will always remain.
So it's being characterized as the victors as mainly a group of reformers who have gained particularly the seats that Hezbollah and its allies have lost. So the outcome, it may not be a major shift for some. Some say that it offers a glimmer of hope, but I'm just looking back at the street protests that became almost something of a daily thing. The slogan was all of them, and I mean all of them, referring to the government. Is that going to change the tone, the expectations from those who are against what they saw as the economic decay?
Well, we hope so. We hope that there's going to be some economic turn in terms of to the better, because the situation currently in Lebanon is dire. Shortage of fuel, high unemployment rate. Their currency has depreciated by almost 70%. So it's hoped that the new government will assist in boosting the economy. But there are other standing issues that until they solve, it's unlikely that we're going to have a movement in terms of positive economic changes in Lebanon. One of them, of course, is that Lebanon runs a paramilitary. In other words, there's a parallel army in Lebanon, which is run by Hezbollah. Hezbollah is supported by the Syrians and the Lebanese and the Iranians. And until that changes, you're going to have the same problem. The other thing is there is a very deep corruption culture in Lebanon. Certain families controlling the larger part of the economy in that country. And again, until that changes, you are likely to have the status quo continuing. And that blast that happened in 2020, if you remember, the blast that happened in Lebanon and it rocked the entire Beirut, the causes of that, or the people who were behind that blast, negligence by and large, are still to be taken to court. So those are the kind of issues that are standing, and I think they will remain an impediment towards a reformed economy in Lebanon. But we'll have to wait and see now that Saudi again is in the mix, and they've supported some of the political parties there, and they've got the deep pockets. And chances are, of course, that they might just invest and try and resuscitate the economy, notwithstanding that Saad Hariri, who used to be the ally of the Saudis, decided to boycott the elections this time around. And Saad Hariri is one of the most popular politicians in Lebanon, and he was the prime minister before the current prime minister in Lebanon. So all of those things, I think, they will play towards whether we see a change in terms of economic improvement in Lebanon, and also the political stability. But until those kind of things that I've mentioned earlier are taken care of, you are unlikely to see a prosperous Lebanon, both economically and politically.
And what about the political elites in Lebanon who have no doubt benefited from the past malaise?
Well, they've got the money. I mean, right now we've got that big standoff of Carlos Ghosn, who is the former boss of Nissan, who was somehow smuggled out of Japan, and he now sits comfortably in Lebanon, and they are trying to extradite him. That is, the Japanese are trying to get him back so that they can face music because of the accusations that he faces in Lebanon. So you have these families that are actually controlling the economy and controlling a lot of very powerful institutions within Lebanon. So Lebanon, to an extent, sometimes most people refer to as a haven for corrupt Arabs, particularly Lebanese Arabs, who often find themselves much more comfortable and they can do as they please in the country. So there is a very, very deeply entrenched culture of corruption. And until, again, those kind of things are solved, you are likely to have the current economic situation continuing unchanged.
So the socio-economic complications in Lebanon are said to impact more the youth, even as you mentioned the corruption, which has been said to be either on a grand scale or petty level. How to then transform the situation and be more inclusive with the youth and have them participate in the reform of the country?
Well, you need level-headed politicians who will work hand in hand with economists in terms of trying to solve the problems of Lebanon. As you know, Lebanon is a very tiny country. But what I think further complicates the situation in Lebanon, as I've said earlier, Lebanon has got basically three external, well, not external, but three very important players who are not necessarily part of the official politicking in terms of elections in Lebanon, and that is Hezbollah, and we've got Syria, and we've got Iran. All of these players have a significant role within the political scenario in Lebanon. And until you have, for example, a much more listening, in inverted commas, Hezbollah, who doesn't often threaten instability in that country, you are likely to have the situation continuing as is. And as long as you have this one big sponsor who seeks to have Shia expansionism in the Middle East and is playing an important role in Lebanon, in the form of Iran, again, we are likely to have this instability continuing. Syria, again, is another stumbling block towards the peaceful economic transition and political transition in Lebanon. So those three players are very important, and they continue, I'll argue, playing a very disturbing role in terms of the stability, both politically and socially, and politically and economically inside Lebanon.
It's been said that statelessness is also a major problem in Lebanon, and it's prevented people from accessing public services, especially like health and education. Muslim women also coming under particular scrutiny of disadvantage. So a roadmap of sorts that would create a level of equality even within what is said to be a secular system.
Well, I don't think we'll ever achieve a secular system in Lebanon, but the issue of immigration is very serious. As you know, Lebanon is also one of those countries in the world, actually, that host a number of refugees, particularly Palestinian refugees. We know of the popular refugee camp called Sabra and Shatila, where a huge massacre committed by Israel occurred in 1982. So Lebanon is a host of a lot of immigrants, and the fear at the moment is that with the continuing instability, you are likely to see migrants once again leaving Lebanon into Turkey and en route into other European countries. So that's the greatest fear that you have at the moment, unless, of course, we have a miracle in terms of reversing all the adverse economic conditions and political instability that we find in that country. But if that doesn't happen, you are likely to have a second mass exodus of people from that part of the world into Europe, and that's what most people are scared of right now.
All right. Thanks so much for speaking to us, Thembisa Fakude. He is a senior research fellow at the Africa-Asia Dialogue. Just to look at a report that was released earlier on this year, was just saying that the human rights situation in Lebanon has deteriorated to a point that more than 80% of the country's residents don't have access to basic rights. And as we mentioned earlier on, that includes health and education, just an adequate standard of living.